Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep. Welcome to the Hindu analysis for 25th December. Before we begin today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to our official Telegram channel for regular updates on current affairs. So let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an important column from page number 11 of the Delhi edition. As the year 2022 draws to an end, the writer of this column, Suhasini Heather, examines the contours of India's foreign policy this year and evaluates whether any changes have taken place in India's position with regard to key geopolitical developments of the year. The writer begins by acknowledging that 2022 has indeed been a difficult year for India, as we have been facing several geopolitical and diplomatic challenges. Particularly, the Russia-Ukraine war, Western sanctions against Russia, and the ongoing border dispute with China along the line of actual control, and continuing instability in our immediate neighborhood have all created several challenges for Indian diplomacy, as these developments have adversely affected India's national interests. So, in this context, it becomes very important to understand in detail the overall approach that India has been taking this year to deal with its geopolitical challenges. So, we are going to break down this discussion into four subtopics, and first we shall focus on our immediate neighborhood to understand how India's ties have evolved this year with our neighboring countries. We shall also take a look at our extended neighborhood, including Central Asia and West Asia. Then we shall talk about the ongoing border crisis with China along the LAC and evaluate India's position with regard to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And finally, we shall take a look at other highlights that define India's foreign policy for the year. First, we begin the discussion by taking a look at India's immediate neighborhood, that is the South Asia region. Here, the map that I have shared could be very important, particularly for your prelims. And I would request you to take a look at the countries with which India shares a land border and also roughly remember the length of these borders, as you can expect map-based questions in prelims. The longest land boundary that India shares is with Bangladesh, as the border stretches to more than 4,000 kilometers. So here, I would like to give you a small exercise. I want you guys to identify the Indian states and union territories that share boundaries with these neighbors of India. So make a compilation of this list and share it in the comment section below. So when you look at India's immediate neighborhood, the top priority for India would be stability in the region, as any instability in our neighboring countries will definitely have a spillover effect from across the border and could lead to security and strategic challenges for India. This year in particular has been very challenging for India, as most of our neighboring countries have seen several challenges, beginning with the massive economic crisis that was witnessed earlier this year in Sri Lanka. As Sri Lanka fell under a debt burden, and as it was on the brink of complete economic collapse, India stepped in by providing economic assistance to Sri Lanka worth around $4 billion in the form of line of credit, fresh loans, deferment of existing loans, along with restructuring them in order to allow Sri Lanka the breathing space that was needed to overcome this economic crisis. India provided assistance even through the SARC framework and has even extended economic aid to Sri Lanka to help ease the crisis in the country. Over here, India has been very mindful of the rising influence of China, as Sri Lanka has not only heavily borrowed from China, but China has even refused to help out Sri Lanka during this time of crisis. It is believed that China would like to exploit this economic crisis to gain strategic advantages in Sri Lanka and in the Indian Ocean, and hence India has been proactively involved in this crisis to help out Sri Lanka to come out of the crisis, thereby helping stabilize not just Sri Lanka but the entire Indian Ocean region itself. Then coming to Myanmar, the country has seen a political crisis over the last 1.5 to 2 years, which has directly contributed to increasing security risks in India's northeast, followed by a refugee crisis. India has been very mindful of these developments and has not only enhanced border security to deal with the threats posed by organized crime and insurgency, but parallelly it has adopted a very realistic policy towards Myanmar's military government. And in the interest of protecting India's close security relations with Myanmar, India has never criticized Myanmar's military junta for the violations that it has carried out in the country, and India even abstained from voting against the Myanmar military junta at the United Nations Security Council. This helps India preserve its special relationship with Myanmar's military, which is critical for ensuring the security and stability of India's northeast. Then, coming to other key neighbors, such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal, India has continued the friendly relations with these countries and has even taken forward a regional trade agreement, that is the BBIN arrangement, along with working out energy trade agreements with the hope of creating a South Asian energy grid. Even though Bhutan has stayed out of the BBIN motor vehicles agreement for now, India, Bangladesh, and Nepal are going ahead with the BBIN motor vehicles agreement and regional trade arrangement. But all the four countries are very much interested to collaborate in the field of energy cooperation, as India has not only helped Bhutan to export electricity to these countries, but it has also been playing a key role in helping Bangladesh and Nepal as well in meeting their energy requirements. Despite the political and social challenges in these countries, especially in Bangladesh and Nepal, India has continued the close relationship with special focus on connectivity and economic arrangements. Then coming to Afghanistan, the country has been in a state of crisis since the Taliban took over last year, and even though India broke off ties with the Taliban, it started reaching out to the Taliban from the last few months and has even reopened its embassy in Kabul to directly carry out a diplomatic outreach to the Taliban. India has even dispatched a lot of aid, including food aid, to help out the Afghan people. And now India is looking to revive its interest in Afghanistan by directly engaging with the Taliban. This definitely marks a policy shift on India's behalf because for several decades, India has treated Taliban as a terrorist outfit and has not maintained direct contact with the Taliban. But the changing circumstances in Afghanistan has forced India to carry out this policy shift. And now India is also seen to be directly engaging with the Taliban in order to protect its security interests and as well as its key strategic investments amounting to nearly $3 billion that India has made in the country over the last 20 years. So while India has made progress with most of its neighboring countries, its ties with Pakistan have more or less remained flat as tensions and disputes continue to remain between the two countries. As India held membership at the UN Security Council as a non permanent member, India utilized the opportunity to target and corner Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism and has consistently put pressure on Pakistan with regard to the Kashmir dispute and as well as with regard to Pakistan's failure to act against terrorism and terror financing. Then, if you look at India's extended neighborhood, such as Central Asia, for example, earlier this year, India invited all the Central Asian leaders for the Republic Day parade and held a virtual summit with these leaders to take forward India's ties with Central Asia. This has become a top priority for India in its diplomacy as India seeks to strengthen its economic and security relations with the Central Asian countries. India's primary focus is on establishing connectivity with this critical region, which is blessed with immense natural resources, and also to engage with these countries in the security and counterterrorism domain to deal with the security threats present along the Afghanistan Pakistan region. Then, coming to Iran, even though India's ties with Iran has been compromised due to India abiding by American sanctions against Iran, India has deliberately tried to take a neutral stand on the ongoing crisis in Iran. Over the last few months, Iran has been witnessing massive protests against the authoritarian government, but India, as much as possible, has taken a neutral stand in order not to alienate Iran, which is critical for India to connect with Afghanistan and Central Asia. So, this essentially outlines India's approach towards its neighboring countries and its immediate neighborhood this year, and also highlights the changing contours of India's foreign policy. Then, coming to India's most problematic neighbor, China, the country has been consistently hostile towards India over the last 2 years. In 2020, China triggered the Ladakh crisis along the line of actual control, with significantly escalated tensions between the two sides. Even though India and China began negotiations and started a disengagement process, China's approach towards the disputed border has remained consistently hostile and aggressive, which has obviously taken a toll on the India China relationship. It has become increasingly challenging for India to deal with a complicated neighbor like China. And even as India's economic dependency on China continues to grow, China recently opened a new front at Tawang which led to fresh clashes at the Yangtze village in Arunachal Pradesh. Even though Prime Minister Modi has engaged with President Xi Jinping multiple times, including at the SCO summit, China's aggressive approach towards the border dispute has continued, thus leading to questions against the policy of the Indian government, and this scenario is likely to continue for the next year as well. Then, coming to the Russia Ukraine war, this development clearly posed the biggest diplomatic challenge for India, as India was torn between Russia and the Western countries. India has found it extremely challenging to strike a balance between the two. While India stayed away from directly criticizing Russia, it firmly managed to avoid Western pressure to abide by their economic sanctions. And in fact, India stepped up its trade and defense engagement with Russia. India became one of the biggest buyers of Russian discounted oil, along with continuing defense imports, including critical weapon systems such as the S-400. Then, at all major international organizations, be it the United Nations, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the Human Rights Council, at all these key platforms, India continued to back Russia by abstaining from all the votes against the country. Then India tried to balance this pro Russia approach by directly urging President Putin multiple times to cease the war, as it has had a devastating effect on the global economy. The war has led to disruption in global supply chains and has increased global commodity prices, including oil prices, which has had a huge impact on the Indian economy. In this context, India has urged President Putin to put an end to this unnecessary war, and Prime Minister Modi even directly pointed out to President Putin that this era is not the era of war, thus seeking to protect India's interests with the Western countries as well by appearing to be taking a middle approach. While the Western countries criticized India for this non aligned approach, India justified it by highlighting India's principle of strategic autonomy, which has been the bedrock of Indian foreign policy since 1947, and by redefining the principle of non alignment as the principle of all alignment. India's stand has been that this approach seeks to protect Indian interests, as both Russia and the Western countries are equally important for India. This stand of India has been appreciated by Russia as well. But the continuation of the war by Russia will continue putting India under pressure and is likely to remain a major challenge for the coming year as well. Then, if you look at the other key developments, India is going to host the G20 next year as it holds the presidency of the G20, which gives India a unique and a great opportunity to show global leadership in working out solutions to some of the pressing economic and geopolitical challenges that are facing the world. Parallelly, India also is holding the chair of the SCO, which gives India the opportunity to work with Russia, China, Central Asian countries, and also with Pakistan on key issues affecting the Central Asia region and as well as the region around it. Then, for the last 2 years, India was a non permanent member of the UNSC and even held the presidency of UNSC for a couple of months. During this term, India championed many initiatives at the United Nations with special focus on counterterrorism, maritime security, and other initiatives. Over this year, India has opened up to free trade agreements again by signing important trade agreements with UAE and Australia and is in the process of negotiating similar FTAs with UK, European Union, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and even with Canada. This is a major shift that India has shown after India quit RCEP or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Plus, India has continued to strengthen its close strategic relations with US by joining US-led initiatives such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the India-Israel UAE-US Summit. So this helps us understand the broad contours of Indian foreign policy seen in this year, and one can agree that while India's core principle remains a constant, there have been some changes as well that India has shown in its foreign policy in order to adapt to the evolving geopolitical situation. Now let's take up another important column from page number 11 that examines the current state of the Indian economy. The writer is of the opinion that the Indian economy has largely remained resilient despite all the external challenges that it has faced. Over the last 2 years, the Indian economy has been influenced and affected by external factors such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia Ukraine war, and as well as the rising inflation and interest rates, especially in markets such as the US, which has led to a flight of capital from developing nations like India. Despite these grave serious challenges, according to the writer, the Indian economy has withstood and has been resilient. But there are some serious challenges that lie ahead for India, as the Indian economy appears to be on a slower track as a result of both domestic and external challenges. What helped India to overcome the external factors is the strong growth seen in India's agriculture sector with record outputs, followed by a complete revival of consumer demand, which had been pent up due to the pandemic and the lockdowns, which led to a dramatic revival in the services industry, especially in contact services such as hospitality, tourism, etc. While this has helped India overcome the external challenges, the fears of a long term global recession, accompanied with high commodity prices, especially food prices and oil prices, could put a lot of strain on the Indian economy. Also, the crunch in global supply chains as a result of the Russia Ukraine war, plus the fresh wave of the pandemic which has been triggered in China by new variants, could again disrupt the global macroeconomic factors, which in turn could put a lot of pressure on India. Parallelly, there are domestic challenges coming up as well due to high inflation as a result of easy monetary policy that was followed during the pandemic, accompanied with a slowdown in critical sectors such as manufacturing and industrial growth. This has pushed RBI to adopt a cautionary approach, and in its monetary policy, the RBI has raised repo rate repeatedly in order to absorb the excess liquidity to tackle inflation and the high prices. But the downside of this policy is that it has compromised growth due to limited liquidity that has been available. So these domestic risk factors, accompanied with the global risk factors, could present a major challenge for the Indian economy. Now let's take a look at this article from page number 12, which examines the military support that the US has extended to Ukraine in its war against Russia. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine at the start of this year, the US has led the Western countries in arming Ukraine to help the country defend itself against the Russian attack. The NATO and European Union have not only targeted Russia directly with crippling economic sanctions, but they've also extended financial aid to Ukraine, along with supplying advanced arms and weapons to Ukraine. The US in particular has led from the front, and over the last 10 months, it has strengthened Ukraine's response by supplying intelligence, by providing training to its armed forces, and as well as by supplying military hardware. The US not only supplied small scale weapons, including anti tank guided missiles, but has also provided advanced air defense support by supplying some of the advanced missile systems to Ukraine. One of them happens to be the Patriot missile, which the US has recently announced to transfer multiple batteries of the Patriot missile to strengthen Ukrainian air defense against any aerial threats from Russia. The Patriot missile, which you can see in this image over here, is considered to be one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. Many allies of US seek the Patriot, and most countries which are close defense partners of US, such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, Japan, and the others, have all procured the Patriot, and this advanced short-range surface-to-air guided missile system is being transferred by US to Ukraine. This is likely to strengthen Ukrainian response against drones and ballistic missiles that Russia has been firing, particularly the ones that Russia has procured from Iran. Even though questions have been raised against the efficiency of the Patriot missile system, the US believes that this could be a game changer, as Ukraine could use the Patriot missile system to target Russian aircraft, cruise missiles, and even short range ballistic missiles. Prior to announcing the supply of Patriot missile system, the US had already supplied the HIMARS, or the High Mobility Artillery Rocket Systems, which is considered as a versatile force multiplier as it can fire multiple rockets and strengthen Ukraine's artillery, which has already played a key role in pushing back the Russian advance. The US has even supplied the multiple launch rocket systems, and through such consistent military support in the form of advanced weapon systems, the US has been playing a direct role in strengthening Ukrainian response against Russia. Analysts believe that this could also send out a strong message to Russia as it marks the deepening involvement of US in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. However, critics point out that the American military and financial support may not prove to be a game changer as it is unlikely to put pressure on Russia, as Russia has shown the ability to withstand Western sanctions. Questions have also been raised over the high deployment and operational costs of American weapon systems such as the Patriot. But the one thing that is very clear is the increasing strategic conflict between US and Russia, where both sides have shown the willingness to go to any extent to protect their respective national interests. But their rivalry and covert wars has ended up destabilizing not just Eastern Europe, but the rest of the world as well. Now let's take a look at this article from page number 8, in which the Hindu carries an interview with a senior commander from the Assam Rifles. The focus of the discussion is on the security threats perceived by India as a result of continued instability and tensions in neighboring Myanmar. But to understand the crux of this discussion, first you need to be very clear with regard to the border security challenges that are found along the India Myanmar border. This map here depicts the India Myanmar border that runs to around 1643 kilometers in length and happens to be one of the most sensitive borders for India. The neighboring states include Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Nagaland, and as well as Mizoram. This long border happens to be a porous border due to the complex geography and terrain of the region, as it is covered with dense forests, hilly mountainous regions, and inhospitable remote areas. This porous nature of the border has always been exploited by insurgents and organized criminals in both the countries, as Northeast insurgent groups, such as NSCN and the others, have frequently found shelter and a safe haven in neighboring Myanmar. They have even been able to source weapons, funds, and as well as drugs to fund and run their operations. And it is this direct link between organized crime, especially drug trafficking and arms trafficking, and insurgency in the region, which really concerns India. Myanmar is part of this region called the Golden Triangle, which extends over Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos, and is seen as a hub of all forms of organized crime. So, the cross border movement of insurgents and organized criminals has always been the biggest security risk in India's northeast, and hence the current political situation in Myanmar is of great concern for India. The other challenge for India is that the two countries have put in place a free movement regime which allows for free movement of people in the border villages that are present within 16 kilometers from the international border. This arrangement was introduced to promote cross border trade and to benefit the local economy and to promote cultural ties. But this has often been misused by organized criminals and insurgents. And following the emergence of political crisis in Myanmar, India has even been receiving a lot of refugees as they seek shelter in neighboring Manipur and Mizoram. Several ethnic groups found along the border regions share close cultural connections as well on both sides of the border, which further complicates things for India. So, Assam Rifles is the designated border guarding force to protect the India Myanmar border and to deal with the border security challenges. And in this interview, the senior commander points out the increase in narcotic smuggling from across the border in Myanmar, which has become a serious security concern for India because drug trafficking and all other forms of organized crime shares very close links with terror financing and is seen to enable insurgency in the northeast of India. So, following last year's military coup in Myanmar, there has been continued violence and unrest in the country, which has pushed refugees across the border. Plus, it has enabled organized criminals to exploit the porous border and smuggle drugs into India. There have been seizures of large consignment of drugs by the Assam Rifles, and even other warlike stores have been recovered, including guns, ammunition, bombs, grenades, etc. This increasing security risk along the Myanmar border is also highlighted in another article on the same page. It refers to the rising trend of poppy cultivation in Manipur's hill areas by local tribes, which has not only denuded the landscape and poses an environmental risk, but also enables organized crime and insurgency in the region. Then, coming to the last article for today, we shall take a look at this important development from Afghanistan. The Taliban government in Afghanistan has ordered all foreign and domestic NGOs or non-governmental organizations to stop employing women, especially those who are seen to be violating the strict dress code. So, this gives us an opportunity to talk about how women are treated under the rule of the Taliban. See, the Taliban came to power for the first time in 1996. During this period, that is from 1996 to 2001, under the Taliban, a strict version of the Sharia law was enforced in the country, and women bore the maximum brunt of this, as the Taliban is known to target women and had become globally notorious during this period for violating gender rights and for even promoting discrimination and violence against women. Under its strict version of the Sharia, the Taliban not only enforced a strict dress code by mandating wearing of burqa all the times, but it also promoted active public segregation of women, which was even seen as gender apartheid. Women were not allowed to work, and they were even prohibited from entering public places. Women education was specifically targeted with a ban on girls attending schools and forceful closure of these schools as well. Any violations would involve strict punishment, including public flogging and as well as the possibility of execution. Women were prohibited from going outside if they weren't accompanied by a male chaperone, and they were even prohibited from being treated by male doctors. This directly compromised the educational and health standards of women in the country and also affected their economic and social standing and led to a number of atrocities being committed against girls and women. The Taliban would even encourage and push young minor girls to enter into marriages, while rapes, molestations, and domestic violence would be ignored by the Taliban. But after the Taliban had been thrown out from power in 2001, the Afghan government, with the help of the UN and the global community, had worked towards improving women's rights. But all these gains that were made over the last 20 years are at risk ever since Taliban captured power in the country again in 2021. Since then, the Taliban again has started introducing oppressive and discriminatory policies against women, and the country has steadily noted an increase in human rights violations on the basis of gender. Initially, when Taliban was looking for greater global recognition, it did promise to respect gender rights, but gradually over the last 12 months, Taliban has enforced the strict Sharia, which includes not just the dress code, but has also prohibited women from exercising their right to work and right to education. In the current interim Taliban government, women hold no cabinet positions, and even the Ministry of Women Affairs has been abolished. This has limited their political participation as well, and in the last few months, the Taliban has banned girls from attending schools. And just few days back, Taliban even placed a ban on university education for women. Last month, women were banned from entering public spaces such as gyms, public baths, public parks, and amusement parks unless they were accompanied by a male chaperone. So, while this is the state of women in the country, the Taliban has again enforced a restriction by prohibiting NGOs from hiring women if they are found to be breaching the strict dress code. Now, let's take a look at the mains practice questions. The first question: examine the contours of India's foreign policy as seen over the past 1 year. The second question: the Indian economy has displayed a broad resilience amid strong external headwinds. But challenges remain as inflation remains high, accompanied with other macroeconomic challenges. Illustrate. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been provided in the description box below. So if you found this initiative to be helpful, do support us by liking the video, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.